like to welcome Chris. Chris Czarnik is a national career search and talent acquisition expert. He's got 20 years of HR training and conference speaking experience. He created and refined the innovation process approach to job search, known as the human search engine, working with thousands of job seekers. He came up with, in the 113th Congress, they came up with a national search model that Congress uses for all their outgoing members and staff. He's a subject matter expert. He spoke at many different things. We're really excited to have Chris here today. I'm not going to take up any more time with an introduction because Chris speaks far better for himself than I will. But this is the first of our series. So today we have recruiting employees. Next Tuesday at 11, we'll have engaging employees. And then on the 16th, the following Tuesday after that, retaining employees and becoming the employer of choice. So I'm really excited. I'm excited that we get to have Chris here with us. As I said, I'm going to turn it over to him because he is much more eloquent than I am. So as I said before, if you have questions, keep putting those in the chat. I'll keep an eye on that so that Chris can talk. But with no further ado, Chris.
Well, good morning, everybody. And Nathan, I got to tell you, you did a fine job. Introducing somebody can be a really difficult thing. But I'm really happy to be here today. And of all of the states I have been to in the United States, I have driven through Montana, but I must say I've never had the pleasure to come out and visit. And I can tell from the kind of reception that I've gotten, both from Nathan and everybody out there, that that's a place that I absolutely need to go when all this craziness starts to move into normalcy. My name is Chris Czarnik, and I've spent the last 20 years figuring out why people go to and leave organizations. My work started with creating Human Search Engine, which was really a job search research project, an entirely different way of doing job search that involved people doing a research project to find out who they are, what's important to them, their values, their beliefs, their interests, their personality type, and then aligning that with companies and the cultures that are out there and have them do research to find out the place that they exist. I've done that face-to-face with about 3,000 mid-career professionals and about 10,000 college graduates. And as Nathan mentioned, I'm very honored that in 2016, the United States Congress adopted Human Search Engine as an outplacement tool for outgoing members of Congress and their staff. So what does that have to do with recruiting and retaining talent? Well, I've had the opportunity now over the last 20 years to look 3,000 people dead in the eye across the dining room table, or tens of thousands of people in seminar format, and say, why did you leave? What did you think you knew about the company that ended up not being true? How did you find the company in the first place? And why did you leave? Why was it a bad fit? Was the culture the wrong fit? Was the job the wrong fit? Did you have some expectations that weren't met? And what are you really looking for in the next employer? Well, I will say that after writing the book, Winning the War for Talent 2.5 years ago, this thing has absolutely exploded. And I have the opportunity to be the subject matter expert on this topic for an organization called Vistage, which is 30,000 business owners and CEOs across the country. Make a couple of statements here that will be important to you for you to understand the way I present and the way I think. Number one, I'm a process-oriented guy. I'm a former operations manager and project engineer. And so in my world, even though we're talking about HR, which can be a little bit of a touchy-feely, kind of ethereal thing, do what you love and the money will follow, I'm a very process-oriented guy. If an idea that I present to you or idea that I come up with isn't logical, if it's not sequential, if I can't measure and audit and adapt it, then in my world, it doesn't exist. And so I promise over the next 3 weeks, you're going to come away with at least 5 ideas that you can implement for $0 with your existing staff that will help you be one of the winners for talent. And the second thing you need to know about me is I'm a very binary guy. My personality type is very binary. I like on and off. I like yes and no. I like zeros and ones. I often joke that I love light switches, but dimmer switches confuse me. If I can't get to an answer, if I can't get to a yes or no answer, what do I do next? And so everything you're going to find over the next 3 weeks as we talk about recruiting, developing, and retaining talent are things that you can implement. The only question is, are you willing to do the work? So first, I have to scare you just a little bit. For the next 10 years, the number one challenge to American businesses will be the inability to recruit, engage, and retain talent in their organization. That is not my opinion. That is an absolute mathematical certainty. I don't bet on anything except if it's absolutely certain. And if there's anything certain in the world, it's math. So let's talk about why this change has happened, how long it's going to last, and why it's so important that you act on these ideas before the competitors around you do. Because the bottom line here is that over the next 8.5 years, there are not enough breathing human beings in America to fill all the job openings. I'm not even talking about the right people. There aren't enough people, there aren't enough human beings in America that can fog a mirror to fill all the jobs that are being vacated by the 10,000 baby boomers that are eligible to retire every single day. So let's take a look at that graphic, because it's really important that in the past, it's important to you to understand this threat to your company, because in the past, there were always more people. I mean, if you had trouble recruiting people, let's be honest with you. As an employer, we always had the upper hand. People needed our jobs way more than we needed them, because there was always another person out there. And so in 20 or 30 years, we put an ad out there and 40 or 50 people ran to us, and we got a chance to do 15 phone screens and 7 first interviews and 3 second interviews. And we got to choose one of 3 tremendously qualified people to bring into our organization. But about 5 years ago, something started to change. The same exact companies putting out the same exact great job with great pay and benefits, now instead of getting 50 applicants, got 7. And of those 7, most of them had absolutely no business applying. And we started interviewing and hiring people that we would have never even considered 5 years ago. If that sounds like what your hiring has been like over the last couple of years, the math is going to show you why. And then my job is to teach you how to fix that and be 3.5 years ahead of everybody else in the hiring process. Because this doesn't just affect Great Falls, Montana. This literally affects every city in the United States. So let's do math, shall we? The demographic shifts that have created a battle for employees are these. The baby boomers are 57 to 75 years old. They are retiring at a rate of 10,000 a day. Let me say that again. They're retiring at 10,000 a day and taking with them all of their knowledge from your organization, all the organizational knowledge, all the organizational history, all the expertise that they spent the last 20 years learning in your organization. And so even when you hire somebody to replace them, you're not really getting a one-to-one exchange, are you? You're exchanging somebody who has 25 years of experience in education and leadership and training about your business and your organization and your industry. And you're trading them for somebody who is wet behind the ears and very willing to learn. But we have to start from scratch. But the baby boomer generation is why it has been so easy to hire over the last 40 years. Again, let's just be honest with ourselves. If you were an HR manager, you didn't really have to worry, assuming that you were a decent place to work and your pay was within the 45th to the 65th percentile of the normal salary range for that job. You didn't really have to worry at all about if people were going to apply. Today you do. And the problem is, as I talk to people in SHRM organizations and HR managers in HR organizations around the country, there is no class until this class today on what to do when you post a perfectly good job with perfectly good pay and perfectly good benefits, and nobody applies. So the baby boomers, there were 75.4 million of them. They are leaving the workforce at 10,000 a day. The Generation X, the generation immediately after them, 38 to 56 years old, these are your mid-level managers, your upper-level managers. The number in yellow should scare you. You wonder why we are having trouble recruiting people? There are 9.5 million less people in the workforce. Again, not my opinion, a mathematical certainty. It's this impossibility of finding great people is the only logical end result of having almost 10 million less people in the workforce. And so when you post a job ad, the sucking sound you hear is 65.9 million people trying to fill the roles that are being vacated by 75.4 million people. Now, if you don't need any people for the next 8.5 years, you're in luck, because the millennial generations, which we'll talk a lot about each one of these generations going forward and how to speak to them and how to recruit them, they're 21 to 38 years old, and it's actually larger than the baby boomer generation. But their wants, their needs, their desire to grow in an organization, the way they look for a job are entirely different. And my job is to prepare you to speak to them. One more thing to scare you before we move on to the answer. And that is that according to the United States government labor statistics from 1945 to 2008, the labor participation rate was very steady at 68%. Labor participation rate is the number of adult people in America who choose to go to work more than half time. So for the better part of 60 years, 68% of all those adults who were ready, willing, and able to go to work more than half time did. But something happened during the Great Recession. Attitudes started to change. With the mass unemployment and the fear that people had with the idea that there was no longer security with employers, we now have 11 straight years where the labor participation rate has been 63% or lower. Not only are there 9.5 million less people in the workforce, but of all the people in America, fully 10% of them are choosing not to go to work the way they used to. And again, one of the things I want to tell you is I want you to challenge everything I'm telling you. I don't want you to believe anything I'm saying because I'm just some guy you've met. I want you to do your own research and see if these numbers are correct. And if they are, you will convince yourself that taking action to be one of the winners of the war for talent, it should be one of the #1 initiatives in your organization going forward. So there's a saying from the United States military, as a former military officer for about 7 years, and we had a really common saying, and that was, if you need it bad, you'll get it bad. What that means is we have started to interview and hire people we would have never even considered 5 years ago. And while hiring that person feels really good for the HR person in the short term, we know that we are planting a poison seed that 6 weeks or 6 months from now, we will begin to have to gather up the poison fruit from that poison seed. We hire people that don't fit, that have a spotty record because we don't know how to recruit other people. We don't know how to get people to apply. So we choose from a much smaller and a much less qualified workforce that's available. And then we need it bad. Production's got to go. The facility's got to move. The services have to be delivered. We have to fill that spot. And so we begin to fill it with people that maybe shouldn't be in our organization. And then we know full well that somewhere down the line, that poison seed is going to produce poison fruit that we as HR people, which I was one for many years in Fortune 500 and family-owned companies, we know that we are the ones who are planting the seed and have to clean up the mess. So this saying, if people don't want to do the work I'm asking you to do, I just want you to remind them that with employees, as with everything else, if you need it bad, you'll get it bad. So what I'd like you to do very quickly is I need to make this real for you. So because time is the only non-renewable quantity and is the most valuable thing that you have, and by the way, I'm super grateful that you took time out of your day to attend today. But if it's important enough for you to attend today, then I've also got to convince you that the work I'm asking you to do will pay off in great multiples going forward. So what I'd like you to do is just think about right now one position in your organization that is currently open because you couldn't fill it, or you have trouble keeping filled. I'd like you to write down the name of that position. I will never know what it is. I'm not going to ask you to share it unless you choose to in the question and answer session. But when you write down that position that you have trouble filling, now I'd like you to assign it a value. And that value is, what is the cost to the company if that job stays open for a year? What is the cost in profit? What is the cost in overtime that you're pushing on other people? What's the cost of errors and missed orders? And if you're working your other people overtime to fill for those people that you couldn't find, how many people are you running out the door with the excessive overtime that you're running? Now, let me give you a clue here. The easiest way to do this is not just to write down what their pay and benefits are. We hire people because they will produce more for us in profit or income than they cost us in pay and benefits. So for example, the number I'm looking for you to write down here is some number of the actual bottom line cost to the company if that job stays open. If we're paying somebody $25 an hour and another $7 an hour in benefits, that's $32 an hour, roughly $65,000 a year. But if they produce for us $180,000 in profit at a 50% margin, you'll see that there's $90,000 at stake here. And so what I'd love for you to do is just write down the name of this position that has been driving you crazy and has been creating tremendous costs and difficulty in your organization. Because when you go to your organization to say, we should do these things that Chris has suggested, I want you to be able to balance it with some actual cost. All right, over the next 3 weeks, we're going to talk about 3 different concepts. Today, we're going to talk about external recruiting. How can we sell your job opportunity like you sell your products and services? One of the great things that about my work, or I think it's a great thing about my work, is that you don't have to believe me at all. Because all I did is I spent a year reverse engineering how Nike and Bose and Ford and Toyota sell us everything from cars to chalupas. And so you don't have to believe me at all, but I think you do have to believe the marketing efforts of the Fortune 500 billion-dollar companies that I studied. So how do we sell your job opportunity the same way you sell your product or service if people are no longer just walking in the door based on your job ads? Number 2, the sign of a really healthy organization, as I work with companies around the country to implement these ideas, the sign of a really good and healthy organization is that approximately 40% of all their new hires come from direct referrals from current employees. We're going to talk about, if that's not happening in your organization, what's stopping people from doing it and how to fix it. And then the 3rd week, I'm going to give you a model. I'm going to show you a model, the zero-cost model that you can literally create a development program in your organization to become an employer of choice, where not only will people you'll create a parking lot for talent and a leadership development organization, but people will show you that they want to be the next leader and not just tell you, wow, the overall important ideas or topics to your organization grow inside your organization. So the easiest way to explain is that there are 2 ways to recruit talent, just like there's 2 ways to go fishing. You can, if you go fishing, you can go to a lake, and much like we put out a job ad, you can drag a net across the lake and you can gather up all the fish out there, and then you can sit on the shore and throw back all the ones that are out trout. And at some point, after 8 or 10 hours and lots of back breaking and sweat work, you will come up with 40 or 50 trout. And that really represents how we have hired in the past, and we only did it that way because it worked. But when it doesn't work anymore, we need to do something different. But if we were truly fishing for trout, the other way we could do this is we could learn everything we could about trout. We could build a model around, a persona around the trout we're trying to catch. What's the right lure? What's the right depth? What's the right time of day? Which lake should we in? Which part of the lake? Which time of day? Which time of the year? We would talk to people over and over who have fished for trout their whole lives. And then we would simply use, instead of a net, that lure at that time of day, at that depth, in that lake, at that time of the year. And lo and behold, we will catch many less fish, but virtually every one of them will be trout. And almost every one of the employees that I'm asking you to do this recruiting for will fit the model of the ideal applicant you're looking for. The second way I can describe the way we're going to do this is we're going to create a persona. If you'll write that word persona down, that word persona is all over the marketing organizations that I studied for a year. Did you know that the very first thing that any company does before they create a persona or before they create a product or service is they create a persona, a fictional model of their ideal customer? And what I'm going to suggest here is that we use that strategy that companies use on us every single day to create a model of our ideal applicant and put the message that speaks to them in front of them where they are when they're in the emotional and job place that it will speak to them. And the best example of that is probably an end cap in a grocery store. I'm going to go through this quickly because I want to give you tons of information, but I want to let you know that what I'm teaching you today has impacted you virtually every day of your life. If you think of an end cap in a grocery store, it's a display. Like, let's say it's for soup. It's Campbell's takes out and spends somewhere between $2,500 and $4,000 a month to have an end cap in a grocery store. Well, in order for them, a billion-dollar company, to spend that much money in one grocery store, it must be very effective. So how do they know why it will be effective? Well, the first thing they do is, let's say you're going to buy tomato soup. You don't really care. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't really care which tomato soup I come down with. But I do have 4 important criteria. It has to be less than $1 a can, has to be less than 300 calories per serving, has to be less than 500 milligrams of salt, and it has to be a name brand. Those are my 4 criteria for buying tomato soup. And so Campbell's knows that because they have done interviews with thousands and thousands of customers, and they know exactly who's going to be in that store. And so right before you turn down the aisle, just like a job seeker going into Indeed or Monster, looking at the hundreds of jobs, just before you turn down the aisle to get assaulted by 72 different brands of tomato soup, I'll be darned if there isn't a display right in front of you of Campbell's soup, 97 cents a can, 250 calories per serving, and 400 milligrams of salt. I don't know about you, but I know what I do. The first item that fits all the criteria of what I'm looking for in a can of soup, I buy, and then I walk past the other 72 brands of tomato soup. And that's what I'm going to teach you to do here over the next 3 weeks, is to put your job opportunity in front of the right people at the right time by understanding who they are, your ideal applicants, and a lot of that information is already inside your organization. Let's talk about how we do that. There are 2 words. There are copies of the book that I'm really grateful that Great Falls is going to supply to you. And again, the books I write are very process oriented, and they'll teach you exactly what to do and how to do it and how to measure it. But the 2 words I capitalize every single time are unwilling and unable. And that's important because what I've learned from the military and from my work with companies is anytime somebody doesn't do something that you want them to do, as a leader, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, were they unwilling or unable to do this thing I wanted them to do? And it's the same thing with job seekers. If you've put out what you believe is a perfectly good job with good pay and good benefits, if you've put it out there and people aren't responding, the next question you have to ask is, are people unwilling or unable to apply for your job? Let me define terms, if I may. Unable means that they lack the physical or the mental capacity to do it. A good example of that is they've never heard of your company. They never saw your job ad. They've never once considered your industry, or don't believe that their skill set, whatever it is, would transfer into your industry or into your organization. They are unable because they've never heard of or seen your company and have no idea that they might be a really good fit in your organization. As a matter of fact, if you'd like to write down a phrase here, I often tell people it's what people think they know about your organization that keeps them from applying. And we're going to talk about those preconceived notions and how to fix them in your ads in just a little bit. Or are they unwilling? So if people are unwilling or unable to apply for your job, unwilling means that they know your company exists, they saw your job ad, but they have made a value decision based on what they think they know about your organization and have applied and decided not to apply. So what we have to do is figure out if people who are not applying for your jobs are unwilling or unable. And in order to do that, I need to teach HR people and recruiters to become hunters of talent instead of farmers of talent. A farmer of talent is how typically most HR people have been trained to hire people. We we taught you how to create a job ad. We taught you how to follow the rules and make sure that we weren't discriminating against everybody, that we followed all the guidelines. And then when we put the job ad out, we just expected these lots of people who needed our job would come. That's a farmer of talent. We wait for people to come to us. Hunters of talent are just like the best salespeople in your organization. And again, taking a note here might serve you well. What I'm going to teach you to do, what might be new for your recruiting and HR staff, for you it's overwhelming and it's a new idea. For your sales group, it's just Tuesday. Literally, we have two kinds of salespeople in your organization. There are hunters and farmers. The farmers are the people who sit back and they wait for a call to come in, and then they provide really good customer care for that person who called to ask about our products and services. But then we have the hunters of sales who actually go out, they initiate conversations, they create a model of our best customers, and they identify what problems our products and services solves, and when do they have that problem, and how can we predict when they have that problem. And that's what I want to teach you to do. So let's talk about whether people are unwilling or unable to come to work for you. Now, one thing that's really important to understand here is that none of these concepts are out there in the air. What I want you to do is I want you to go to your current employee base, and I want you to ask them a couple of questions, because whether you know it or not, you did something right to get those people in the door. You don't know what it is, because once we hire people, we don't really ask them, how did you find us, and what preconceived notions did you have about us, and why did you choose us over other organizations? But that kind of market research is exactly what Nike does. It's exactly what Boeing does. It's exactly what movie theaters and Disney does to identify what speaks to people. So go to the last 5 people that you hired and ask them, number 1, what job were you in before you came to us? Number 2, how long were you in that job? Number 3, what happened in your life that made you want to start looking for a different job? We'll talk about all this in a second, and I'll give you a list that you can print share with you. And then, what were your preconceived notions about our company or organization that ended up being false what you got here? Again, it's what people think they know about your organization that keeps them from applying. I can tell you from those work with 3,000 job seekers face-to-face that there are 3 reasons that they're not applying to your job. Number 1, 70% of them literally have no idea your company exists. They've never worked in your industry, and I know this is hard for you. Oh my goodness, when I talk to business owners and presidents of companies, the idea that we have been in this same city for 22 years and we have 114 employees and we give to the United Way and we have billboards, the idea that people don't know we exist is absolutely ridiculous to them. But the people in an organization, that organization, it pretty much fills your whole bubble of thought every single day. You think about it all day long, every day. As a matter of fact, if I asked you to talk about other industries out there other than yours, you'd probably have a pretty tough time doing it. But what I can tell you is that fully 70% of people in any geographical radius has no idea that your organization exists. Let me prove that to you. There's a database called A to Z database that I have access to, and I did a search. I did a search of all the different kind of organizations around Great Falls within 30 miles. Guess how many there are? Organizations of any kind who are out there looking for people. There are more than 8,000 of them. Now you live in that community. You're a professional person who networks in that community. Of that 7,000 or 8,000, how many of them could you name? Do you see? Is it possible that people don't know your company exists unless you go directly to them? It's not only possible, it's almost certain. But the next one is really important here. 20% of the people who are not applying for a job, and I hope you capture this, have some false preconceived notion about your company or your industry that keeps them from applying. 20% of the population, they saw your job ad, they thought your pay was fine, but they had some false preconceived notion about your industry or your organization that made them say, I'm not going to consider that. Let me give you a couple of examples, and then I'm going to ask you to capture a couple of those false preconceived notions yourself so you have something to work with when I teach you how to create a tagline around them. Here are false preconceived notions. All small companies have bad pay and no benefits. All big companies treat you like a gear, and they'll get rid of you when they don't need you anymore. All family-owned companies are political disasters. All manufacturing is dark, dirty, and dangerous. All nonprofit organizations don't pay people anything, and you have to be 50 years old or above to belong there. Do any of those preconceived notions sound familiar to you? Every single one of them in my work across the country ends up being false, depending on which organization that you're going to. So the next thing I want you to do is I want you to go to those same 5 people, the last 5 people that you hired, because again, we want to recreate that event that turned them from a non-employee in your organization to an employee in your organization, and ask them, what were the 2 preconceived notions you had about our company or your industry that ended up being false when you got here? You can actually do that with your customers, and you can do it with your employees, long-term and short-term employees, and you can do it with your leadership group. Every organization knows that there are some of these preconceived notions out there. But for example, if I told you that if your son or daughter came home and said, I'm going to go into manufacturing, and you didn't really know anything about manufacturing, you might think that manufacturing is all dark, dirty, and dangerous. Well, that might have been true actually 40 years ago. Might have been true 30 years ago. But the manufacturing organizations I work with today, you can literally, I'm not figuring, you can literally eat off the floor, and safety is the #1 premise of the organization. So ask your current employees, why did you come here? What job were you in? What made you want to move? How did you find us? Why did you consider us? And then what are 2 false preconceived notions that you had about our organization or our industry before you got here that ended up being false? And I'll show you how to work with those in just a little bit. One of the fundamental problems that we have as HR people is that we've not been taught a way to customize our message. You would never write the same love letter to every person you were trying to date, right? I mean, if that was your plan, if you were trying to write the same love letter to everyone you were trying to date, I hope being single has worked out well for you. It's just a really bad plan. But when we put out a job ad, we have gotten to the point where we put out one job and we just expect it to speak to everybody, because again, for 40 years or more, they have needed our job more than we needed that person. And today, fundamentally, the math shows you that not only is it easier to find a job than ever, not only are there more jobs than there are people, but the fact is, what you're going to learn in just a second is that the generation of people between the millennial generation and Generation Z, losing their job or finding a new job is actually a fun project to work on. The baby boomers right now I think they're probably really taken aback, because for us, because we had so little access to finding new jobs, losing your job was this scary, overwhelming thing. And today, finding a job is as easy as typing 7 keystrokes on a keyboard and going to Monster or Indeed or montanajobs.org or whatever it is in your area. So let's talk about how we create advertising that speaks directly to each of the generations. And this is where we're going to start to talk about creating a persona around who is the ideal candidate, who is the ideal applicant for this job that you're advertising. Build a persona around them based on the people in our organization who already have that job. Like, one of the easiest ways to build this persona, ladies and gentlemen, is to take a look at the best people that you currently have in this job and ask them all these questions. And if their life led them to your job being a great fit, if their education, if their experience, if their job history led them to be a perfect fit for you, then all we have to do is recreate that and get that message in front of those people at the right time, the right emotional message to bring in people, and you'll have the trout virtually jumping into your own boat. So the first thing is that if you were looking to recruit specifically to baby boomers, you would use the word security. Because baby boomers, we didn't really care about, I'm a baby boomer, and there may be other baby boomers on the call, but what we were taught is that we weren't worried about having the right job. Having any job, having security was by far the most important thing. And so if you were trying to speak to baby boomers, you would use words and phrases at the very top of your job ad that says, the last job you'll ever love. Or if your career has left you behind, you found a home. But security is the word that when my generation grew up, we weren't raised by people who went through the Great Depression, but their parents were. And so security, we would have that in huge letters because we're trying to speak to baby boomers. Now, let me back up just a step here. It's important for you to know that we would not only advertise a job to baby boomers. We would literally have 4 different job ads for 4 different generations we're speaking to. We would never try to recruit only from one age bracket. Not only is that a bad plan, but it's against the law and it's a really bad work practice. But as you can see, if we're going to speak to baby boomers, we need to speak in terms that they understand and believe and have important in their life. And that word is security. If you're trying to speak to Generation X, which is 38 to 56 years old, and by the way, go ask your people in your organization if these words speak to them. Generation X was the first generation of 9-year-olds who all had their own baseball cards. Significance. Do you see me? Are you glad I'm here? Do I matter to the organization? Is the most important thing, the most important thing that they learned in their youth and they have brought into their adult life. Most of the Generation X people you will lose, by the way, you will not lose over pay and benefits. You'll lose because you haven't checked in with them enough, because you haven't assigned them to difficult projects, because you haven't patted them on the back and said how glad you are there. A really good example that I love to use is for a baby boomer, if you go to a new job and you go to that job for 6 weeks, but your boss never talks to you, well, then you're doing a great job. Right? We don't want the boss to talk to us because, when we were growing up, you only went to the principal's office when you were in trouble. But for Generation X, 38 to 56 years old, and some of you on the call may fit into that category, we were the first generation that were told how important and how significant we were. There were 7th place trophies, there were participation awards, there were personalized baseball cards. Whether you agree with that message or not doesn't matter. It's what they grew up thinking about and how they grew up being attracted to things. So significance is about, are you glad I'm here? If you were trying to create a tagline around this significance, you would talk about something like, we don't need anybody to fill this job, we need you. Or if you think you're that special, come show us. That would speak to Generation X people, 38 to 56 years old. The oft-slammed millennial generation. Listen, the first thing you need to understand is we are no longer talking about a mysterious generation that is all 22 years old. We've been talking about the millennials for the better part of 17 years. We now have 15 full years of millennials in the workforce. They are no longer a mystery. And the word that speaks to them is freedom, but be careful here. It's not the freedom that you are likely thinking of. People have this wrong idea of millennials, none of them want to work in manufacturing and all of them want to work from home or 4 days a week and they're all lazy and they're living in their parents' basement. Goodness knows, just stop. Nothing could be further from the truth. What I've learned as the career services manager of the largest technical college in the state of Wisconsin for a decade is that millennials are asking for freedom to solve problems creatively. Let me say it again. If you want to get the attention of millennials, we need to advertise that we have interesting problems that we need them to solve. How do I know this is true? Well, number one, millennials are the first generation who don't know a world without Google. They have had access to the combined knowledge of the history of the world within 15 seconds since they could speak. And so the idea of finding information, learning something constantly has never not been part of that world. Now, again, your baby boomer managers may not think that way, and maybe even your Generation X managers may not think that way. But solving problems creatively, learning things constantly, usually based on all the free information that's out there on the internet, is what really draws millennials in. But the real hook comes here. If there are any millennials on this call, I will tell you that millennials were also the first generation who grew up with an electronic babysitter that we called video games. I have to admit, I've put in my requisite 5,000 hours in first-person shooting video games. But regardless if you've never played a video game or haven't played one in years, what you'll realize if you think about it is that the base premise of every video game you've ever played is problem solving. In Tetris, you turn the blocks so that they line up together. You find the key to open the door. You find the right person to get the clue. You get the clue so that you can find the map. Not only are millennials completely addicted to new learning, but second of all, if they're not solving an interesting problem, they're bored to death. And something that's important for you to understand with these 15 years of millennials in the workforce, the average millennial, unless they are challenged, will change companies, not jobs. They will change companies every 3.4 years. Again, not my opinion. We have 15 years of evidence to say that's true. So not only do we need to speak to them in terms of needing them to solve our problems, but also what you'll see in the third week is how we can create a model that gets them to learn on their own with all the responsibility using free resources that are available to them 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. For some of you who are about to try and hire in the youngest of the generations, that is called Generation Z, they're 21 years old or younger. And Generation Z can be defined with the one word, and that word is purpose. Does my work make somebody else's life easier or better? Let me say it again. It's the first genuinely unselfish generation. They're more interested in the work that they do making other people's lives easier or better than they are, do I make enough money? Do I have enough stuff for me? And so I have a great friend, his name is Charles Antis. He owns Antis Roofing out in California. And his slogan is keep other people safe and dry. Your work keeps other people safe and dry. And he has Generation Z people running to him. Would that message speak to a baby boomer? Probably not. Generation X? Likely not. Millennials? Mm-mm. But he has his target when he puts that ad out is he's trying to get Generation Z people coming to them. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to identify using these questions and ideas and build a model or a persona of the ideal applicant that we want to apply for our job. You don't want everybody applying for your job. I remember that. You get 75 or 80 resumes and 80% of them have absolutely no business applying. And based on what they sent me, they didn't even read the job ad. I want you to get many fewer applications, but the applications that come to you are from people who are in the right place at the right time, and your opportunity is the right fit for them. So how do we build this persona? Well, again, I want you to go to your own employees. There's no theory here. Go to your own employees and ask them about their life before they came to work for you. What education experience do they have? I got that. We've already got that kind of built into hiring. But the next thing is personality type. If you're not using some personality type tool in your hiring process, I think you're probably really missing the boat. And there's a free one out there that you can use anytime you want. If you go to the website, www.16, the number 16 personalities.com, www.16personalities.com, you can have a free Myers-Briggs type personality test. And if you're looking to hire your next great engineer, have your current great engineers take it and identify what personality type really great engineers generally have. And then there's 85 years of experience, over 300 million people in research that will tell you exactly what those people, the words that people with that personality type respond to, the hobbies that they have, where do they volunteer, what's important to them in their life, what do they value, what do they believe. And you will be able to speak to that person directly by creating a job ad specifically for that personality type, because we know that if they're in this personality type, there's a pretty good chance, if they have the right education experience, that they're going to fit. Go to your current people and ask them, what job were you in immediately before you came here? And how long were you in there? Ladies and gentlemen, I got to tell you that LinkedIn is the biggest advance in recruiting ever. And if you're currently paying a recruiter to 30% of somebody's first year's wages to find them for your organization, what I'm trying to tell you is what they're doing is exactly what I'm teaching you. This is what your recruiters do. And you can absolutely do it on your own. In a study in 2017, 94% of recruiters across America, the first stop they made was LinkedIn, looking for great candidates. And if you think of all of these filters we're putting in, personality type, the job they're currently in, how long are they in that position, we can put those filters into LinkedIn in any geographical radius, and we can identify people who fit this persona. We can find every junior engineer that's been in their job 3.5 years in a small organization, and it's likely, or at least it's very possible, that they're looking for a full-time engineer job in a bigger organization, and after 3.5 years, they're frustrated in their current role and would be open to making a change. And we can reach out directly to them using LinkedIn. We also need to identify, if we talk to people who came to work in your organization, a term called flux. Now, flux is a term that's been around forever, and flux essentially means a change agent or something that facilitates change. Changing a job, if you think of when you left your last job, it's a really emotional thing. I mean, in order to be frustrated or angry or excited enough about an opportunity to leave all your friends behind, to leave all your knowledge in that company you've been at for 5 years or 8 years or 10 years, there generally has to be some emotional event going on in that person's life that makes it important for them to find a new job. So once again, go to your own employees and say, what was going on in your life that made you come and find us an employer? You just have a new baby? Did you just move into the area? Did you just finish your online degree, but there was nowhere to get promoted to? Did you become the primary breadwinner and your spouse or significant other was going to stay home with the kids and you needed a more significant job? Go ask people individually without even telling them why. You'll explain all of this to them in time, but just ask them, what was going on in your life that caused you to undertake this emotionally taxing process that we call job search that ended up leading you to us? What was their current family and life situation? And was there some change in their family or life situation that caused them to need to make a change and find a different job? And then the last thing I want you to ask them as you're creating this persona based on real evidence, nothing theory here, because you're asking these people who have already great employees who are good at their job and you love having them here. Ask them, how did coming to work for you make their life easier or better? Let me say it again. Ask your current people, when you came to our organization, how did your life get easier or better? Because if you have talented employees, you're glad they're there, but if they're talented, they can leave anytime they want. So you have to ask them kind of, why did you come and why do you stay? Is it the work environment? Is it the culture? Is it the educational opportunities? Is it the challenge? Is it the group and the team that you work with? Are you getting well developed by your supervisor? Do you like the work that you're doing? Are you passionate about the work that we do? What is it about this job, our organization and our industry that was so enticing to you that you left all your friends and former coworkers behind and set out to find a new job that led you to us? And how did your life get easier or better, not only for you, but for the significant people in your organization? Because what you're going to learn in next week's session is I'm going to teach you about how to create emotional anchors for your employees that reach directly into their household and directly and positively affects their spouse, significant other, and children so that they will stay. Almost done. This is the last chart that I'm going to leave you with today. And again, I'm going to encourage you to take a screenshot of this. What I learned as we're creating this persona or model for the ideal applicant for our job is this form. Those marketing companies asked 5 questions when they asked somebody about selling a product or service. Who are you selling it to? What is their current situation? What problem does it solve? What causes that problem to occur initially? How does their life get easier or better if they buy your product or service? And more importantly, most marketers believe that every buying decision is an emotional decision. So what emotion does using your product produce? And the reason I have 2 columns is I want you to sit with your sales and marketing staff, because they do this every day. They create personas of the ideal next customer every day. They've already done it for your products and services. Let them help you do it for your employment opportunities. And so you will have clear messaging. You'll have a clear idea of what you're selling and to who and where to deliver it. And then we'll talk next week about how do we get not only those people in, but how do we get your current employees to bring great people into your organization and develop them inside. Sorry, guys, I get pretty excited, but absolutely open for questions if you have any.
Yes, I don't have any questions in the chat, but if you want to, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Or if you want to just type it into the chat quick, I can still read it off. So we'll kind of open this up for questions if anybody has any.
Anyone? Bueller? Bueller?
Hey, sorry, I couldn't unmute myself successfully. My name's Errol. I work with a Trans Systems. We're a regional trucking company, and we hire a lot of seasonal employees. You know, there's a lot of stuff that applies here. There's a lot of stuff that you know, at first blush kind of feels like, you know, this is for hiring a managerial type position. How do you kind of bridge that gap of, you know, we're not hiring one vice president operations, we're hiring 500 truck drivers. You know, how do you kind of blend this process into that type of hiring?
Well, so the very first thing is this is not designed essentially for higher level people. The vast majority that I teach this to around the country are looking for hourly people or entry level supervisors. And so just to be clear, you could absolutely use it for higher level people, but the recruiting we're looking to do is on a high end. And I can tell you this about trucking as a fact, because again, I was in charge of the career services for the trucking for Fox Valley Technical College, where we would train about 1,500 truck drivers every single year. The very first thing we had to do was identify the jobs that people had normally before they became a truck driver, right? Something was wrong in the job that they had that spoke to the freedom that they needed, that their life situation, you know, do they have children? Do they not have children? Are they married or not married? Newly divorced people, I'm going out on a limb here a little bit, but newly divorced males were one of the most fertile feeding grounds for trucking organizations when they came to the technical college. Also, if you have technical college and trade schools that are training truck drivers, if you're not on the advisory board already for that college that is training and producing 500 or 800 truck drivers every single year, the access to those employees, you don't want to try and get it to a job fair because you can't differentiate yourself against other truck driving organizations. But once you get on the advisory board, which are required by law for every technical college and trade school that gets government funding, you will get direct access to the instructors and the students coming out of that organization. So personality type first, go talk to your people and use 16 personality types. The people who have this job that they love have a certain personality type. They have a certain life situation. If it's just seasonal, by the way, what you want to look for is secondary breadwinners or people who have cottages or want the time off, right? So people who have cottages, they don't use that cottage that much in the winter time. So if you're looking for truck drivers to deliver Christmas packages, you want to identify people who have cottages or second homes that they spend a lot of time in the summer. They don't want to work in the summer. They want to make their money during the cold months when they're not up there. So lots, you know, if you want to send me a note, I'd be happy to give you some of these ideas. But building that persona for you is really important because the number one reason people don't go into trucking is they think that they can't. Mm-hmm. And their preconceived notions of, well, I'm going to be in New York battling traffic every other day and I won't see my family for 3 weeks at a time. It's what people think they know about trucking that keeps them from going.
Awesome. Well, appreciate the help and appreciate this seminar.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
There was a question in the chat. What are your thoughts on having SHRM certification if you're interested in applying for an HR position?
So make sure that you want that you're doing it because you want your education, not simply because you want to put letters after your name. What very often happens is when people in HR roles or they're HR generalists and they want to become HR managers, they go back to school because they fail in their job search and they don't know what else to do. They're actually not moving towards the training because they really want it, but because because they don't know what else to do and they think getting more education will do it. Now, getting more education, if you want, is a fantastic thing, and getting those letters across your name. I want to tell you, though, that the most likely change you're going to make is from like an HR generalist in a big company to an HR manager in a very small family-owned organization, right? You don't make moves from company to company, larger size. Usually what people do is they go to a higher job in a smaller size company when they make the transition up into a higher level job. So A, make sure that you want that training, and B, start focusing on much smaller and even family-owned organizations that are more than 4 but less than 10 years old, who they've had the owner or the manager doing the hiring and are now getting big enough that they need somebody, but they don't want to pay them $140,000 a year, and they don't need somebody with 12 years experience. They need somebody who will do a lot of things, will learn their way of doing it, and that likely is going to be in a family-owned or a much smaller organization than you're in today.
Great. A couple minutes left. If anybody has any final questions to either put in the chat or to talk about.
I think I'm just going to leave with this, unless there's another question. I'm going to leave with this, Nathan. I want you to really invite, take these concepts, even though they're new to you, and the next time you create recruiting, invite your sales and marketing staff in. This seems radical to you, different to you. For them, it's literally what they do every single day. But I'll leave you with one last idea. You are making a huge mistake putting all your pay and benefits in your job ad. And let me tell you why. The goal of a job ad is designed to get people to interact with you in some way, right? And that's what we're going to talk about next week, is how do we create a tagline that you can use in advertising around those false preconceived notions. But from those 3,000 job seekers, I can tell you the most likely reason people aren't applying is not because your job isn't good. It's because it looks like every other job out there. You've given them all the pay, all the benefits, all the development opportunities to allow them to compare it with all the other jobs posted out there. And then they make a decision on whether to apply without ever getting to talk to you. My goal, just like the advertising that's done in virtually every other organization out there that uses these techniques, is to create questions with your marketing, not answers. Create questions that can only be answered, get their interest, get them excited, but give them answers or questions that they can only answer by interacting you directly with some way, walking in the door or calling you. And that's how we get the right people to become interested in your job or your organization.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. You'll get a reminder for next week's webinar as well, but it will be the same Zoom login that you had for this one. So we hope you got lots of great information. Thanks, Chris. I thought it was wonderful. And if you do have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on that email, and I can always get you Chris's information. Yes. I'll pull, there's one more question in here, but I'll hold it for next week. That way, if we do have questions, we can bring it up then. So thanks, Chris, and thanks, everybody. Any final thoughts other than what you shared with us?
I do. Remember, next week, I'm going to teach you why your current great employees, even though they love your organization, they tell everybody how excited they are to work for your organization. They tell you at every Christmas party they'd never work anywhere else. I'm going to explain to you why they're not bringing great people into your organization and how to fix it, so you can have 40 or 50% of all your new hires come from direct referrals.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris, and look forward to listening to you again next week. And thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful week.